Afternoon to all of you. There is an English version as well as a Hindi version. I'll read the statement and then I'll take your questions. The BJP is celebrating 2 years of the NDA government. I said BJP advisedly because its partners in the government, notably the Shiv Sena, have not joined the celebrations. On the contrary, the Shiv Sena has been extremely critical of the BJP. Besides, there is no evidence of any enthusiastic participation by the people in these so-called celebrations. There's good reason why the mood of the people is somber and sullen. The reason lies in one word: the economy. In this brief opening statement, let me begin by listing the few positive achievements of the NDA government. Helped by low oil prices, CPI inflation, which was at 6.7% in June 2014, came down to 3.7% in July 2015, but has since risen to 5.4% in April 2016. After sliding back on fiscal consolidation in 2015-16, the government has affirmed its commitment to achieve the target fiscal deficit of 3% in 2017-18. However, there are questions about the methods adopted, ambitious revenue targets, and off-balance sheet borrowings. It will also be 1 year late, but better late than never. The government has maintained, not accelerated, the pace of building roads. Production of coal has increased by 8.15% and 4.62% in the 2 years. Production of fertilizers has recorded 11.26% in 2015-16 after contracting minus 0.07% in 2014-15. What I have listed above do not amount to even a bare pass in the overall scorecard. At the same time, there are many negatives, and the Congress party holds the government accountable to the people on these issues. Let me list them. Where are the jobs? The most notable failure of the NDA government has been in job creation. The ferment in universities can be partly attributed to the bleak future faced by university graduates. Besides, there are millions of young people who will complete no more than 8 or 10 years of school education and will have no special skills. Where are the jobs for them? 2. The government's record in agriculture is dismal. Growth was negative at 0.2% in 2014-15 and a meager 1.1% in 2015-16. The government failed to anticipate and tackle the acute distress in rural India. The Supreme Court has chastised the government in the strongest terms for negligence in managing the consequences of 2 years of drought and passing the buck in providing drought relief. Dr. Ashok Gulati, in a signed article, has upbraided the government for gross neglect of the agriculture sector. 3. Annual sales growth of all firms in 2015-16 was negative at 5.7%. Annual sales growth of manufacturing firms was negative at minus 11.2%. These are reflected in credit growth, which is at a 20-year low of 9.9%, the average for the months of 2015-16. They are also reflected in the slump in merchandise exports, which was minus 15.5% in 2015-16. Another indicator is the index of industrial production, which stood at a meager 2.4% in 2015-16. 4. If agriculture and industry are in distress, what is there to celebrate? 5. Make in India is at the present stage a non-starter. There is a study which shows that the bulk of the FDI inflows have come into the services sector and not into manufacturing. 893 projects were classified as stalled projects in March 2016. According to CMIE, 1,137 projects slipped into the categories of stalled or shelved or abandoned in the last 2 years. There is no evidence of private investment in greenfield manufacturing industries. 6. CPI inflation has risen from 3.7% in July 2015 to 5.4% in April 2016. It is not clear whether the government and the RBI are agreed on the strategy for inflation management. Absent an agreed strategy, inflation is bound to increase. 7. There is little cheer in the GDP numbers. There is a growing dichotomy between the GDP numbers and the other economic indicators. If calculated under the methodology of the old series, the estimate for 2015-16 would be about 5% and not 7.6%. The average citizens need jobs and incomes. They do not consume GDP numbers. I shall now be happy to answer your questions on the economic situation after 2 years of the NDA government.
I'll come to you.
Well, we think that doing business has not been made easier. In fact, it may have become difficult because of the environment of suspicion that is being created all around. Every act is suspect and every decision is centralized. I don't know what Governor Haley had in mind, but if Governor Haley felt that everything is so centralized, and that is why unless you know someone you can't get business done in India, I think she's more or less right. So I've said in my statement that while they have promised to achieve 3% by 2017-18, that will be late by 1 year. The methods they will use to achieve that target, which appears to be off-balance sheet borrowing, I think are questionable. The panel they've set up is to give themselves flexibility in the fiscal deficit target. I've already stated that it is a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea to have a flexible fiscal deficit target. A fiscal deficit target must be a target. It cannot be a moving target. It cannot be a malleable target. It cannot be a flexible target. The UPA government appointed one of the most outstanding economists of the world as the governor of RBI. We placed full confidence in him at that time. We continue to place full confidence in him today.
How far is the government's failure to simulate growth due to world economic conditions and due to drought and the failure of monsoon? Beyond the control of the government?
Government is never in control of all factors. In 2008, we were not in control of the global financial crisis. government's capacity is judged by its ability to respond to the situation as it finds it. I agree that the global situation is not very benign, but it is nowhere near the crisis proportion it was in 2008. Secondly, oil prices comparatively continue to be less than one half of the prices that they were even 3 years ago. Thirdly, government is not the cause of the drought, but we all know that drought happens in India from time to time. You must be prepared to anticipate and tackle the drought situation. This is what the Supreme Court said. Drought took place, but you failed to anticipate and tackle the situation. So I think the government of the day ultimately is responsible for responding to the situation. It cannot throw up its hands and say it's beyond our control. No, I'm grateful for the honorable mention. If he has evidence, he should place evidence in a court of law. Only those who do not have evidence will want to place innuendos and suggestions before Parliament. Parliament is not a court. Evidence must be placed before a court of law. I've not said they followed all our policies. I've said that Nirmal Bharat Abhiyan is metamorphosed into Swachh Bharat. National Skill Development Mission is metamorphosed into Skill India. Financial inclusion has become Jan Dhan. Maganrega, which was rubbished, has now become the pillar on which government addresses rural distress. Aadhaar, whose utility and validity was severely questioned by the BJP, has become the mantra for all its programs. Therefore, what we pointed out is many of the things that you are now doing and you're now celebrating are things which were launched by the UPA government. But we don't say that they are following every one of our policies. If you ask me about a specific policy, I can respond.
One sec. Sir, my question is about the GDP numbers.
I'll come to you.
You and your fellow spokesperson for this podium have actually raised doubts about the GDP numbers and the method of computation. Whereas the government actually has been citing the GDP numbers as one major achievement, and it said that internationally the Indian economy has been claimed as one of the shining spots. So do you actually are trying to suggest that basically the government is projecting a wrong figure as far as the GDP numbers are concerned?
No, I'm only reflecting what many learned economists have said. We are not questioning the integrity of the CSO. What we are questioning is the methodology adopted. The CSOs adopted an inflator of 1 for the year 2015-16. Many economists, not I, many economists have said, please justify adopting an inflator of 1 to arrive at the GDP growth from the nominal growth. We have not had a satisfactory answer to that question. Therefore, if government stands by the GDP number, it is entitled to. It must also ask the CSO to explain how the inflator that has been adopted is the correct inflator. All that we are pointing out is, if you calculate under the old methodology, it is approximately 5%. If you calculate under the new methodology, it may turn out to be about 7.5%. So government has a duty to explain to the people.
Sir, my question is on that
Best what? I disagree, but go ahead. I don't know what you mean by practical. If you mean tolerant towards black money, I disagree with you. Yes, the real estate sector, the construction sector is going through a very bad phase. There are no buyers, there are no sellers, is what they tell me. Huge amounts of built-up space is going a begging. But these are matters for the government of the day to address. It cannot close its eyes and says, well, that's it.
Mr. Chidambaram, you said that you continue to have full confidence in RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan. What do you make of Subramanian Swamy's unrelenting onslaught on Mr. Rajan?
If the finance minister or the prime minister make a similar comment, I will respond. In the absence of the finance minister and the prime minister making a similar comment, there is no need for the Congress party to respond. That's because all of you are giving them space and time. Give us the space and time and we will also give you interviews. No, let's confine first to economy and then we'll go to other subjects. You must tell me which section. It depends upon the credibility of that section, isn't it? I've told you before, I'm not in the business of rating. I'm not a rating agency. All I can point out is there are no jobs. I can point out there are no investments. I can point out that industry is in a slump. I can point out that exports are down 17 successive months, and yet nobody seems to care. If exports are down for 17 months, thousands of jobs must have been lost. That's a logical inference. So I can give you my views on each one of these subjects. The citizens of this country, the people of this country will drop their own scorecard. My party's position is that we have raised 3 principal objections, apart from some minor objections. My party's position is that the government must engage the opposition parties on the 3 objections. Either the government must convince us that our objections are unfounded, or government must accept our objections are well-founded and bring about the amendments. Such an engagement, such a dialogue, to the best of my knowledge, has not yet taken place across the table.
Can you speak loudly, please?
First on the economy, please. Let's talk about the economy, please. First. So what's the question? If I can put the question to a straw vote by this audience between Dr. Raghuram Rajan on the one hand and the Commerce Minister on the other, you know how the vote will take place. I ask you to vote. Those in favor of Dr. Raghuram Rajan versus the Commerce Minister, please raise your hand.
When you were finance minister and reservations about the RBI governor's interest rates, that they were not brought down sufficiently, and the same complaint continues for many quarters. What's your view on that?
You must read a forthcoming book by Dr. Subbarao, former RBI governor, and there's one more coming by Dr. Reddy. World over, finance ministers and central bank governors engage in such a dialogue. That doesn't mean the finance minister is questioning the competence of the RBI governor. Each one approaches the economy from his or her own perspective. Government's perspective is growth. The central bank governor's perspective is monetary stability. As I said in one of my columns, 8 out of 10 times both will agree. And once the monetary policy statement is made, the finance minister will endorse it. Unfortunately, that is not news. 2 out of 10 times, when the finance minister expresses some reservation, that becomes news. That is true of all finance ministers and all central bank governors all over the world. As far as we were concerned, we had the best of relationships with all central bank governors, and as long as we were in government, we had the best relations with Dr. Raghuram Rajan. No, but that is not for us to say. Unless all the data is with me or anyone in my place, we cannot prescribe policy solutions. We can only advise, we can only nudge the government to go in the right direction. It's only the government which has all the data. Without data, it will be unsafe to prescribe policy. Well, the right direction is the direction in which the UPA steered the economy between 2004 and 2009, when the international financial crisis hit us. And the right direction is what we did after 2012 to contain inflation, to contain the fiscal deficit, and to contain the current account deficit. Once the economy has stabilized, as I believe it was by June of 2014, then the government should have then given the economy a big push, did bold structural reforms, taken the difficult decisions which had been pending because the UPA did not have an absolute majority in the Lok Sabha. Now that this government has 282 or maybe 283 in the Lok Sabha, it should pick up the courage and take bold structural reforms. And in doing so, it must engage the opposition. The Congress party is willing to be engaged if the government means business.
Congress party said of this class only on 26th of May that we have seen so far as the achievement are concerned, this government has achieved social tension. I would like to ask that there is any relationship between this social tension and the condition of the economy?
Of course, there is. Unless there is social peace and harmony, unless there is security for the workers, unless the minorities, the Dalits, the farmers feel secure, they will not wholeheartedly participate in producing goods and services. No country which has recurrent social tensions has achieved high growth. Take the countries which have achieved high growth. It's because there is social peace and harmony.
How do you look at the handling of the government of the banking sector in the backdrop of the huge bad loans piling up and the NPAs?
Well, I think they have handled it with a heavy hand. And I think the finance minister himself a few days ago did comment that we should not have blown the matter out of proportion. NPA is a difficult problem. All I can point out is what the governor said on NPA and what Mr. Vinod Rai said 3 days ago as the chairman of the new board. NPA is a problem, but don't paint every NPA as a crime. You have to make a distinction between NPAs which have occurred as a result of an economic downturn or a global factor, and NPAs which are the result of willful default. If you don't make that distinction, you're bound to make mistakes.
One second.
Do you think Dr. Rajan deserves a second shot at RBI governorship?
I'm beginning to think whether this government deserves Dr. Rajan.
I'll come to you. आप मुझसे ये सेपरेटली पूछ लीजिएगा. आज चिदम्बरम साहब अर्थव्यवस्था पर उत्तर दे रहे हैं. मैं आपके प्रश्न का अलग से उत्तर दे दूंगा.
Not too many, just a couple of questions. Just a moment. Yeah, we were having breakfast with Lashkar at Toiba, and then we invite them over for dinner too. These are irresponsible statements. Work with the opposition. Engage the opposition. There is talent and sound advice outside the government. Call them, talk to them. That's the advice I would give to any government, including my own government.
Ma'am, once I'll come to you.
We'll have to go. Of course, there is a pattern in it, and I think my colleagues have pointed out the pattern. I thought a book was released yesterday by someone. I have not read the book, but that also hints at a pattern. There is a pattern. How do witnesses suddenly turn hostile after a new government is in place? And why tarnish the memory of a martyred police officer who's known for his impeccable record of integrity and honesty? Those of us who have a heart and a conscience must read Mr. Julius Ribeiro's passionate article which appeared in one of the newspapers a few days ago. If Mr. Ribeiro's article will not move our hearts, nothing else will move our hearts. Thank you. Next time. Oh, we have answered so many times.